Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Feinberg. I'm a customer engineer with Google. Before I joined Google about 10 months ago, I worked at the New York Times on the New York Times cooking app. Yeah. Um, so today we're going to be talking about a product that's been around for a little while now, renamed as of this week to Cloud Build. So Cloud Build is Google's, think of it like a sort of pay-as-you-go serverless platform for CI/CD. So if you've used things like Jenkins, Drone, Circle CI, Travis CI, blank name followed by CI, you kind of know how these sort of things work. Google's approach is a little bit different. You don't pay for static hardware to hold your test runners and all that stuff. There's no slaves. You just upload it. We run it for you as a Docker container, and then spit out the results for you. So it's an integrated experience into the rest of Google Cloud, and it works really well. What we're going to do today is we're going to walk through step by step. I didn't realize there were animations on that page. Step by step on sort of how to take an app and add Cloud Build to it, and adding that CI/CD functionality to your app. Cloud Build is not an answer to every problem when it comes to CI/CD. If you're looking for something more advanced with really expressive ways of deploying, you probably need something more robust like Spinnaker, which is an open source project that Google and Netflix launched a few years ago. But Cloud Build solves a lot of problems, and you can extend it as far as you want to, because every build step is just a Docker container. So we're going to switch over to the live screen. Oh, boom. Fantastic. So we're going to take an app. So I currently have an app running on GKE. This is a sample app that Pivotal has called the Pet Clinic. So if you happen to have any pets, this is what your vet might use. Waiting for it to load. But essentially, it's running on a GKE in containers, and we're going to walk through how to actually add Cloud Build to it. And make sure the internet's actually connected. Yeah, cool. So the app's just slow. Fantastic. But it is running. It's in Container Builder. Here's my cluster. We have a couple different processes that we'll be deploying out to. So this is the web process. If you've used GKE before, this should all look familiar. How you actually access it. So there's a load balancer, as you can see. And we're going to deploy out to it. So we're going to do this all in Cloud Shell. So Cloud Shell is basically just a hosted development environment that already has all of your permissions and stuff baked into it. Two-factor auth is important. Let me just let that load for a second. How many people here have used Cloud Build before? So a few people. Who have used Cloud Shell before? Yeah? It's pretty cool. I like it. So we're going to open up the Pet Clinic app. So pretty straightforward. Most of what we'll be looking at will be in the CLI here. Everyone can see in the back what I'm typing? Pretty much? Cool. So we're going to check out the beginning of our project. Because I don't trust myself to actually type out all the code, you'll see that I have branches for all the code. So as much as this looks like live coding, I've written it before. So here we have sort of just a very basic Java app. Looks very familiar. But this is just in MP app, we don't have a Docker file in it yet. There's no cloud build. This would just run. So this is packaged with Maven. So that'll actually run the tests, build the jar, which will actually run in the Docker container. So for our first step, we're going to check out the Docker file that we'll use for this. Okay, so this here we have a two-step process, very simple. We're going to run Maven package. So this runs the tests, builds the jar, and in the second step, we copy the jar we generated in the first step, and that's the only thing running in that Docker file. So this makes sure that that image is as thin as possible, so that we don't have to actually deploy Maven to prod and all the other build aspects of the pipeline. So initially, so that's the Docker container. If I ran Docker build, which I won't because it takes a little while, that would build, and we would have a Docker container that we could run. So the first step to actually add cloud build is to add a cloud build.yaml. So it's very straightforward. Refresh. And there it is. So first step, very simple. We're actually just doing that Docker build. So initially, we're just going to build this to latest. Later on, we'll talk about the semantics of actually how to build that. But this first step will generate a Docker container out of our app. So it just runs that Docker build and stores it in Google Container Registry. So this is all there is. If I went and actually ran that right now, this would go up to Google servers and actually run this build. So that's sort of the simple part. As you can see here in the name, this is specifying what is actually running that build. So in our container registry, we're pulling down a Docker container to actually run that build step. So there's a Docker container that runs Docker to actually run that build for us. Okay. So our next step here is to actually add the Kubernetes that will actually get built. So this has already been deployed to the GKE cluster. In this example, we will just go ahead and just refresh it. So and so we have a web.yaml that actually is going to use that container. So as you can see down here, this is a pretty very basic web.yaml. We're referring to an image that the cloud build would actually use. We're specifying environmental variables. So this currently connects to Cloud SQL. And other things that we're passing to the environment, the Cloud SQL proxy to actually talk to Cloud SQL, so it's not out in the open. And that's all. It's very simple setup for Kubernetes, and this is the load balancer. And we'll talk about what this migration file is in a second. Okay. So in the next step, oftentimes when you build a new package, you might add new assets. So that's a static file best served from something like a GCS bucket. So in this example, we can very simply just do a gsutil copy. So Container Builder has been given me permissions. So we've said Container Builder, you're allowed to talk to this particular bucket, and you're allowed to copy things into it. So we don't have to do any weird stuff to actually download a service account onto our box. We don't have to worry about that. It's all managed by Google by just assigning a IAM role. And so in this example, we would have our load balancer when it was presented with public assets that it needed to request, it would hit this bucket instead of going directly to the app. And that's all that's required for that. Boom, boom. So the next thing is that you might have in a CI pipeline is you might actually need to migrate your database. So in this example with Spring Boot, we don't actually need to migrate a database. It's a static app. But in our YAML, all we're doing is doing a echo, essentially. So what this would do if you were using something like Rails, this would be like a bundle execute DB migrate, or if you were using any other sort of migration tool, you could make sure that your Kubernetes cluster only ran that once. So some people like to run the migrations on every container that's coming up for like a web process. That can lead to issues where you have contention, so you have multiple processes running your container. By putting this into a Kubernetes job, we make sure that this only runs once. And what that actually looks like in Cloud Build is we delete the job itself to make sure that once it ran once and was successful, we have to delete it so we can run it a second time. And then in the second example here, all we're doing is running apply and creating that new job and making sure that it runs. Now, a lot of our apps, you might have to wait to actually deploy and update your cluster until your migrations are done. In a traditional setup like this, you'd say, okay, well, I'm going to execute that. How do I actually wait for that? And that's where the beauty of Cloud Build comes in, where you might say, okay, well, now I can't just have a very simple, straightforward file. Luckily for us, you can extend Cloud Build to do whatever you want. And we have a bunch of sort of pre-built Docker containers that do actions for you. So we're going to talk about one that I wrote called kubectl wait for. And I thought I had it open, but there we go. So kubectl wait for job does exactly what it sounds like. It waits for a job to complete before it lets you continue on. So this is literally a bash script that is wrapped in a Docker file that runs that is passed in the argument of your job name. So this basically tells Cloud Build, hey, I'm going to run this job, but I want to wait to actually do anything else until this job is complete. So just a bunch of bash foo that is essentially wrapping kubectl get jobs and is just polling for that to actually be done. And Cloud Build handles all of this for you. Once this is created in your project, you can just pull that down. And we'll show how that works. So locally, I have checked out the Cloud Builder Community Edition. So for things that are pre-built, let's reconnect first. For things that are pre-built, like Docker, kubectl, you can just reference that. So those are just complete and done. You don't have to worry. For things that are in the community or things you write yourself, you actually need to have a copy of that running that you can access in your registry. So we're going to cd into that. So Cloud Builders Community. Helps to not put a apostrophe first. So we're going to cd into kubectl wait for. So as you see here, we have that bash script, we have a Docker file, and we have a Cloud Build file. So what we're going to do, I'm going to copy from my doc. Which I also thought I had up. To actually go ahead and submit to Cloud Build to actually build our container. So we have a little bit of inception going on. So what we're doing here is we're saying, X out of that, gcloud, send up this Cloud Build and run it for me and store it in my registry. So this is a cloud build that's just, you just go and grab, that's automatically going to grab your current project and your current setup. So this is actually executing, this is going to load up a tarball and load that up to Google Cloud and run that on a fresh VM. So it loads it up. We can view the output. So you can see exactly what's going on. Ran through the Docker container, the Docker file. And now it's done. So now if we go over to our registry, we'll actually see it. kubectl wait for, and here's the latest that was just uploaded. So now this is available in my environment that I can actually pull down. Head back over. So now that that's there, we can go ahead, head back into our pet clinic. Once it lets me type again. You can let me connect. Apologies, network connectivity. We are reconnecting now. But so now that we've uploaded that, we actually just need to add to our cloud build to actually pull that down and wait for that job as the next step. Waiting for this to load. That's not fun. We'll give that another second. Okay. Let's make sure we're using the hardwire. Apologies. I know you've all been enjoying the Wi-Fi this week, so. We're going to set up a hotspot as a backup. I did test this earlier, so we do have a backup solution. Cool. It's going to take a sec. Did everyone have fun at the party last night? So I'd never heard of the Chainsmokers before. I had to ask my girlfriend. I was like, so who are the Chainsmokers? And then she was like, oh, they like play the song you like. And I'm like, cool. And then I showed up and I was like, they don't sing that song. So that was fun. I also didn't know who DJ Spinderella was. So I apparently live under a rock. Okay. We're going to try another tab, because that sometimes works. OK, cool. Look, my Wi-Fi hotspot came in handy. Fantastic. So now we're going to head back into our app, and we're going to check out the next step. To remember what step we're on now. And this will update. There we go. kubectl wait for. So what this is waiting for is for the prior job to complete. So you see in Cloud Build we have these IDs. So every step optionally can have an ID associated with it. So by default, Cloud Build will just run your jobs from top to bottom unless you specify that it can do things parallelly, which you should have it do so that things happen faster. And in those cases, you might still have cases where you want to say, hey, I want this step to happen before this step, but I don't really care where in the whole file this should actually run. So you can put together sort of as complicated as you want before this, after this statements. And that's what you use these IDs for. So like in this case, if I wanted to, for the assets, I could say, wait, my public assets only get generated when Maven package gets run. So I want to make sure that I had the latest ones available. So I could do wait for build image. And then instead of running those parallelly, if I have that enabled, I can instead make sure that the latest assets are actually up to date. And that's very important in this example. When you have something that's supposed to wait for something, you actually need to have that, that step to actually happen. So you might have noticed that, cool, so I have this wait for, but now I still haven't done anything. I still haven't actually deployed. So I built an image, I've migrated my database, I ran my tests. That happens in package, so that'll fail if my tests don't work. But we still actually have to go and update our initial manifest with our latest image. So in our next step, we'll actually just patch our manifest. Stash our changes. And here we go. So in this, very simply in use cases where you can just update the image and let Kubernetes handle taking the containers, pulling them out, and actually updating them, this works really well. So we know our database is in a good state now. Now we need all of our containers to have the latest code. So we go ahead and we patch that manifest that's running. And right now, we're still just going to update that image to just be the latest version of Pet Clinic that we generated in our first step. So this is all well and good, but at the end of the day, you probably don't want to have to run container build submit every time you run a CI/CD pipeline. That kind of defeats the purpose, right? So I'm going to kick this off, and I'll show you guys how to actually run this every time your code is actually executed. So we have this thing called build triggers. Build triggers. So this is where sort of the history, so you can see that I just kicked that off, and you can see that that's actually running in the interface now. So here are each of the steps that we have so far, and you actually can just get the latest log. So in addition to being available in the interface, you can also tail that from the build details itself. And if you want to download the logs, load them into BigQuery or something, you can do that from here as well. You can see the images that are actually generated. So build triggers. So a build trigger is exactly what it sounds like. It's a trigger for running your cloud build. So I have two examples here. One is hooked up to GitHub. So if you push your code up to GitHub, this will automatically grab that and run it. So we'll show what a build trigger actually looks like. So you can trigger it, branch, tag, whatever you want. You can give it some regex. You can say only for something like a Java app, maybe you only want Cloud Build to run when one of your source files changes, not when you edit your README. So that can be pretty helpful if you care about not doing excessive deployments when you're just doing cosmetic changes. And you can substitute variables. So as you saw back here, we have all these things that are just dying, as like a good coder. It's like, wait, you're specifying things. What if I want to change that later? That doesn't seem like the best place for that. So you can actually specify things like your cluster, your zone, other variables from your build trigger itself. So you could have a trigger for deploying to dev, staging, prod, and put in your substitutes as required. All it is a matter of just clicking add item and specifying the variable. So we'll go ahead and let this run, and then we'll show how that works. And so you can do this on GitHub. You can hook it up to Bitbucket. In addition to source repositories. So those are the three options you have to actually trigger these. Of course, you could also sort of build your own trigger by basically just taking your code and pushing it to a cloud source through some other means. And if you wanted to just manually trigger these, you can just click Run Trigger. And here we are back, still running this. So the other thing to look at here is we are currently running this, and we're always building to latest. So that's not really a best practice. This would mean that every time you ran a build, you'd be telling your Kubernetes instances to just run that one. And that works great in dev. It doesn't work that well in prod when you want to actually test your code prior to having it be deployed. So in a second, we'll actually show how that gets updated. I'm still in the build. We'll just open up the next tab. There we go. This is actually running through all the tests, so it takes a second. That tab never came back, unfortunately. There we go. Okay. Okay. So in our next step, we'll actually make that update so that those substituted variables can actually be used. So update in a second. Okay, so we're doing a couple things differently here. One is available to your cloud trigger is the short SHA of the GitHub, of the Git commit that is being built. So a lot of times you want to be able to specify, hey, this build is attached to this commit that I made. So this is a useful way of actually checking that out. In addition, you probably want to have some sort of semantic to say what that build is initially being used for. So in this case, we're going to use something called a deploy tag. So this would be something like dev or prod or staging, so that you'd know, okay, this was built, tagged with this new update, and this is what we're actually going to deploy that to. So if you need to do a rollback, understand the history of that build. So we have these changes. Some of the semantics here are a little bit different. This is, if it's just a $, that means it's provided directly by Cloud Build. If it's a $, followed by an underscore, that means you substitute it yourself. So essentially, it's poor man's name spacing between what Google gives you when you're building it versus something that you define. And you can see that down here as well. So now in our trigger, we'll have something called compute zone and cluster that's specified by us as far as where we actually want to deploy that to. So as long as you have given Cloud Build the permission to the project where that cluster is running, this will all work. You can see that all the way down. And then here, instead of setting the image to latest, we set it to the deploy tag that's actually being run. So let's head back to our build, see if we finished. We failed. Yeah, we will rerun that. Oh, it's a different one. Here, this one succeeded. So we'll actually go ahead and just run our next step. That actually includes that. So now that we have these changes initiated, we can actually, in addition to running them through Cloud Build, you can actually test it locally as well. So I'm going to grab the substitution there. Oh, I might actually not have the substitution there. So it's basically the same as that submit. And then we can actually specify substitutions. So where did I put that? So yeah, so it's this submit substitutions equals, and then you actually can specify what you want to change. So in our case, we have a couple of things. So we have a deploy tag. So we can say deploy tag is equal to dev. Oh, thank you. Spelling's hard. It's too early in the morning. I'm still on East Coast time. So we have compute zone. So we ran our zone in US Central C. It's going to yell at me for the underscroll. And in the actual build trigger, you can actually run these yourself, but it's pretty useful to be able to run this locally several times without having to push it up. Also, just being able to run your build without having to go back to the interface, committing nonsense, things like that. So it gives you the opportunity to really play with the build file. And also when, GitHub goes down, you can still run it. And what else we got? What was the other one? Cluster, thank you. Should have you guys write this. Cluster, I think it's Scott's Pet Clinic with an extra dash. I spell my name with 2 T's. So I go ahead and run this, see if it lets me. So this is going to do that same thing, tar up the file, upload it, and actually run it. So Cloud Build, at the end of the day, oh, cool. Invalid name. Great. Oh, yeah. So this short SHA is not available locally. So that's why that error happened. So I can actually, so while it's not available locally, I can actually still substitute it. So I can still go short SHA equals whatever, 1, 2, 3, and that'll get around that. Or I could actually look at what my short SHA is, which would be the other option. So this uploads it. Google's actually going to run it on a fresh VM. And there it kicks off. So that, in a nutshell, is Cloud Build. So it's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's excellent for these sorts of use cases where you have a small app that you're not worried about, deploying, doing like a blue-green. You're able to trust Kubernetes to deploy it for you. And hopefully you have some sort of test suite that is going to let you actually accomplish CI/CD. Other great benefits of Cloud Build for doing these sorts of things, especially for small apps, is that if you don't have an existing CI/CD setup, or perhaps you don't want to spin up a new slave for Jenkins for a new app, Cloud Build is pay-as-you-go. And not just in the same sense as traditional resources. You pay by the second that your build actually runs. So I think every day you get about 100 minutes for free of Cloud Build, and then you pay some number of pennies after that. But it's fully managed. You don't have static hardware, and most importantly, you're not troubleshooting your CI/CD test runners and slaves when they happen to go down. So you don't have to actually maintain this. All you're maintaining is a YAML file in your repo. And And that's Cloud Build. If anyone has any questions on Cloud Build or anything like that, we have mics set up. If anyone has anything.
Does the Cloud Build have any API to kick it off remotely?
Yeah. So what you're seeing me do here, this G-Cloud, is just a wrapper for a API call. So it's all available as long as you have a service account that can hit it. You can kick it off.
Thank you.
No problem.
Is there anything built in for notifications, like updating status in GitHub or something like that when a build succeeds or fails? Or
It's not built in, but there are a couple community projects that essentially do that. So you can basically add a tag in the same way. Yeah.
Can you trigger the build from a local Bitbucket repo?
So yeah, so that's what. So you can kick it off from a local Git repo. That's actually what I'm doing here. You can't run Cloud Builder locally, in that sense, in the sense that Cloud Build itself is not executing locally. It's just easier to just load it up.
I mean, pushing to a Bitbucket repo from Atlassian, and then the trigger triggers the build on Cloud Builder.
Yeah, so that's built in. So you actually just have to just link it, and then every time you commit to Bitbucket, it'll kick off the build.
Hey, Scott. Great talk. Can you talk about secret management, and if I'm injecting secrets into the flow, would it actually come up through the logs, or if there's any
Yeah, so if you have actual secrets that you want to deploy, those should be living within your Kubernetes secrets file. So I can actually show you how that works. I have secrets in here that are protecting the Cloud SQL credentials. So if you look at the configuration here, so it loads for a sec. So I have these secrets. They don't show you. I couldn't make this show if I wanted to. I would have to download it, base64 encode it to actually view what these things are. But substitutions itself do eventually show up in the logs. So to actually use secrets, you actually want to have that run on Kubernetes and execute it there. That's one of the reasons that running your migrations, you should actually do that on the Kubernetes cluster, not on Cloud Build, because you don't want to give Cloud Build your secrets, and it gives you one place to actually manage those.
Hi. Migration from other build systems. Are there any tools that are planning to make any tools that does that?
To migrate from which system?
From other CI system, for instance, Jenkins, Circle, whatever.
There's not a tool that would essentially do it for you, rewrite your pipeline. But it's something that if in Jenkins you're just running a bunch of bash scripts, you can execute each of those bash steps within Cloud Build.
I understand.
You could actually take the whole bash script, throw it in a Docker container, and execute it on Cloud Build if you wanted to. But
yeah, I understand that. I'm thinking more of the scenarios like I'm a company and I have 200 repos. It's going to be quite an effort to migrate each and one of them. Yeah. But another question, is there a way, if I understand correctly, you need to pre-configure the pipeline. Just a moment. No you need to pre-configure the pipeline to actually does that. Now, let's say the user wants to change the pipeline as part of the PR itself. Is it possible?
Change what on the server?
The pipeline. Let's say you have a Jenkins file or something like that. God forbid. And you actually go and as part of changing you want to change the CI pipeline itself, and you want to test it as part of the PR itself. Let's say for GitHub.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do the same thing with Cloud Builder?
Yeah. So Cloud Build. So the YAML file is just a part of your Git repo. So if you wanted to experiment with it prior to deploying, you could do that locally. But then if you wanted to actually, you could just commit, have the cloud trigger do it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott. Great talk, great demo. I had a question, just real quick ones. Is that example repository going to be online or public exposed? And also the kubectl wait for job, just as a
So
backward
kubectl wait for job is public. So if you just go to cloud builders community,
Okay.
it is right in there. So this is sort of the, think of it like the Bless community repo with a bunch of stuff. So you have Helm in here, Firebase, a bunch of really good stuff. And my sample code will be available. I'm not positive which GitHub account. Currently, it's on mine. So
Okay, thank you.
no problem.
Hi, thanks for the demo. Sorry, a few questions. The first one, in the UI, you were configuring the triggers. Is it also available in the YAML file, so you can do that all declaratively in a file?
There's not yet. I believe someone is hopefully working on that. But yeah, that would be a really nice feature.
And then for the actual jobs, are there any guarantees on performance? Can we expect a similar performance every time we run the jobs for our measurements?
Yes, so you can expect that the job will execute the same because it's a fresh VM of the same size. You can also specify different size VMs. So let's say that you have something really beefy and you want to run like, a bunch of parallel threads in it, you can do that. And you can use as big as an instance as you want. You can just specify that in the cloud build.
Thanks. And sorry, one last question. Is there a way, if you have a lot of jobs coming in from a lot of commits at the same time, is there a way to queue up and say there's only one kind of deploy job happening at once? Or maybe there's only one kind of integration happening to like block the deployment from happening during an integration test?
Yeah, so so you could run an integration test in the same cloud build prior to actually deploying. So that's what that sort of wait for example works well. As far as like a cross cloud build orchestration, that doesn't exist as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hi there. Did a quick search and it looks like it's only for Kubernetes. Is there plans to bring this to like functions or App Engine?
So you can use Cloud Build for anything.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, so it's like, just think of it like Docker containers in the cloud. So you can, you could run gcloud app deploy for App Engine, whatever the command is for functions. So you can use it for anything. It's really for those cases where, like with functions where you're like, great, so I wrote this little function. I really don't want to have to set up a whole like Jenkins setup just to deploy these 6 lines of code. I can just put a cloud build file and it'll take 2 seconds and it'll just be like essentially just like the deploy step, and that's it.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks, everybody.